Hello. Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Military Images Live. Doug, David, welcome. Hey, going to give a couple of minutes for folks to come online, folks to tune in. David, hey. Ann Coddington, the hometown, welcome. Hopefully we'll have a good show for you this evening. See, Dave Yunt is ready. Andrew, hello from North Dakota. Hello from Arlington, Virginia. Glad you're here. Kyle, hey. Mr. Pissarro, welcome. More folks coming on. Hello to Dalton, Georgia. On the other side of the state, I went to high school in Statesboro. So hello to if anybody from Statesboro is out there. But definitely hello to everybody from Dalton. Getting set up. I think I'll go ahead and get started. It's a big month, July, for Civil War history. When you think about all the major engagements that have taken place in July, we have the Battle of Gettysburg happening on July 1st through 3rd. We have the Siege of Vicksburg ending with the surrender of the city on July 4th. We have the First Battle of Bull Run happening later on in July. We have Fort Wagner, and today is the anniversary of the Battle of the Crater in the Petersburg area. So, of course, Military Images has covered all of these battles, these engagements in different ways. However, for the majority of this month, we've been looking ahead and focusing on Antietam. As you might imagine, it takes quite a while to bring together some of the galleries that we produce. And for the first time in a number of years, we're going to be featuring a gallery of Antietam casualties. This has been better part of a year in the works. And from all of the images that we've gathered at shows and from Facebook and elsewhere, we've selected 20 that we think are representative of the soldier experience at Antietam. Just this last week, as we're putting the finishing touches on some of those image selections, the image pictured here was one that we spent considerable time researching. And I want to give you a flavor of what goes into the research behind the stories in the images that you see. This is William Starr King. And the first thing that we found was on a wonderful website that we recommend to all of you, Antietam on the Web. It gives the basic history of King's service, and it also includes some pretty amazing newspaper clippings that appeared in local newspapers not long after the battle occurred. So I want to read you two of those snippets. The first one comes from a Baltimore newspaper, and it says, Captain William S. King of the 35th Massachusetts, who arrived at the Astor House on Saturday last, received 7 wounds at the recent Battle of Antietam. He was hit 20 times during the engagement. That's 20 times. And was pretty thoroughly bound up in bandages when he left this city for his home in Boston. He has lost no limbs, and hopes are entertained for his speedy recovery. There's another newspaper clipping that comes out of New Jersey, out of Mount Holly. And this is a bit of a variation on his story. The escape of Captain William S. King of Roxbury, it's in Massachusetts, from instant death at the Battle of Antietam seems almost miraculous, there being 21 holes in his clothing made by shot and shell, 7 of which took effect on his person, 1 bullet hitting him in the leg which was afterwards extracted, one in the fleshy part of his thigh, one most severe in the shoulder, a mini ball entering at the collarbone in front, one on each side of the spine, making deep flesh wounds, one passing just above his ear, raising a blister as it passed, and a piece of shell hitting him on the head, making a severe wound. He is now lying, unable to move or be moved, but in good spirits. Armed with this information, we set out to find more about his life. We learned that previous to getting into the military in Massachusetts, he was involved in various business enterprises. And when he joined the 35th Mass, taking him up to the Battle of Antietam, we found a little bit more information, and I want to read this to you. As rebel infantry in the cornfield opposite him fired away, Captain William Sterling King paced the line of his 35th Massachusetts Infantry and directed fire. King, acting major of the regiment, paused at one point, picked up a gun, and fired as his comrades cheered. The enemy fire increased, and the Bay State boys returned fire as ammunition was low. With no supplies or reinforcements in sight, King and the others tore open cartridge boxes from those who no longer need them and distributed whatever bullets remained. Darkness set in, and musket flashes lit up the line of battle. The brightness of the Confederates made it clear that the 35th must fall back. By this time, King had been struck numerous times and was assisted from the field with the colors. Here's a little bit about him after the battle. He says, "For 4 months, I struggled for life, a portion of the time against hope, but with buoyant heart, with God's blessing, bore me through." Now, King went on to serve in the 4th Massachusetts Heavy Artillery, various staff duties, and ended the war with a brevet brigadier general's rank. After the war, he returned to Massachusetts, became involved as a civic and political leader, and lived until 1882. He died at age 63, having outlived his wife. Having outlived his 4 children. His wife, Ellen, survived him. So, while we honor all of the men who fought in various battles in July, we're looking ahead to Antietam and look forward to this gallery coming up in our fall issue. So, moving on. I want to salute the work today of Jeff McArdle. I'm going to put a printout here of some of the terrific work that he's done in recent days. You may have seen posts about this on Facebook, on Civil War Faces and Civil War Faces Marketplace. Jeff bought a grouping of images from eBay. All these images were reproductions. And Jeff went about carefully, after he purchased them, he went about carefully cataloging all the photos. As you can see here, you can see the fronts of those images, and here's a bunch of diagrams of the back. You notice that Jeff put numbers all up in here, and he has text that accompanies it that describes the kind of work that was done in these fake CDVs. Some of the things that caught my attention and things that you should be on the lookout for. One of them for sure is that some of these images were pasted to the backs of mounts from cartes de visite that were made in the 1880s and the 1890s. This is a fairly common way to fake images. For those who are not familiar with the backmark images from that time period, you can see there's a distinctive difference in those backmarks. Here's one here. You'll see it's a very elaborate backmark, another elaborate one here. These backmarks are a bit more common to a period after the Civil War. You'll also know, if you've held one in your hands, that the cardboard is much thicker. Jeff talks about all of this in the work that he's done. He also includes some helpful close-ups one of them here, I'm not sure if you can tell through the video, but you can see the actual dot pattern that suggests that it's not original. These dots. Whoa, so much for technology. The dots on here were taken, suggests that it was copied from a print that appeared in a publication, a print publication, and those dots are halftone dots. So if you are somewhere and see an image, if you've got a loupe or a magnifying glass, you might take a close look at this image. If you see dots on it, that's a clear sign that it's a copy of something that once appeared in print. Jeff also notes that some of the images, as you'll see here, are very fine, almost continuous tone images. These are the ones that will really fool you. You can look up close with a magnifying glass and you won't see the dots. But what you will see is a sort of a blurriness. The texture won't seem right. There'll be something, they'll just be a little bit off. So I want to strongly encourage you to read the work that Jeff has done. I'm going to post the link here so you can link to it on his website and get a better sense of what's going on. So the work that Jeff is doing is really, really wonderful. I want to point out too that Jeff is building out work that has been going on for years. In fact, one of the pioneers in my mind that was working on fake images is Perry Frome, who owns his own, he's a dealer and he runs his own Civil War military website. Perry, I think it might have been back in the 1990s, early 2000s, was really big on pointing out fakes. So Jeff, the good work that you're doing, the great work that you're doing is following on a tradition of trying to spot these fake images and to get them out into the marketplace and to all of us collectors. So we really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, I should add, Jeff included this one here. You'll see up in the on the right side, he's included a stamp that that is his own that says Reproduction. And it was a happy moment for him to be able to add that Reproduction stamp on the photo. So beware, be mindful. Don't be intimidated. If you're a collector, especially if you're just getting started, don't be intimidated by the fact there are fakes out there. We've all made mistakes. I am first to admit that I have purchased a couple of images that were fakes. My first one when I was just starting out, and that was a long time ago, back in the 1980s. So that gives you a sense that the fakes have been out there for a while, but they are increasing, partly because of technology and partly because the fact that photography collecting is becoming more and more popular. So I'm going to close with that for this segment. I want to move on to this image. This is from Mike Hilber's collection, and he sent this with a simple question. He wanted to know, or wants to know, more about the backdrop. And I can tell you that it's a fairly often asked question. We'll see a backdrop and we'll want to know more about it because it might be connected to a specific photographer. In fact, it often is a specific photographer that we can then track. And that's really, really important when we have a photograph like we have here. The gentleman is identified. I believe the name is Charles Clark. If you go on to a database like the National Park Service or historical data systems, you'll find a large number of Charles Clarks. So it'd be awfully hard to pin down exactly which Charles Clark we're talking about, especially in this case because he's a private and he's an infantryman. The inside of the case, beyond his name, there's some writing down the bottom that's difficult to read. It looks like Stella, written in pencil. And then in the center, you've got the information that's really from the case maker, daguerreotype case, with some patent dates on it. This information, while it's interesting to case collectors, is not going to help us identify the soldier. So we're looking at this backdrop, hoping that we can trace it to a specific photographer that can then give us some sense of where the individual might have been from. In this particular case, I found it interesting. We've got a really wonderful painting of a camp scene. You can see these large Sibley-like tents that are populating a campground. The canvas, you can see the bottom of the canvas here that is ending right about at where a fairly crude wood floor begins. So that tells me the crude wood floor suggests that this photograph was taken in camp. It was taken by a photographer who perhaps traveled from the hometown of this gentleman or the town from which he enlisted and produced this image. So he probably carried this canvas backdrop with him. It was probably rolled up in a wagon. And when he got to wherever he could set up a studio, he laid out some floorboards. It might have been in an existing home. It might have been some business in town. It might have just been some crude hardboards that he had in the back of his wagon, set up in a tent, put all this together, laid that canvas backdrop up, and opened for business and began to take these images. So I wanted to put this out here tonight to talk a little bit about backdrops, also to enlist your support, reaching out to all of you in the collecting community. If you know this backdrop, and importantly, if you know who the photographer was, if the photographer's name is listed somewhere, or equally, maybe even better, in fact, definitely better, if the photograph you have has the soldier identified, then we're really in great shape, because we can probably say with some likelihood that there's a chance that the soldier here is from the same regiment as the photograph that you have. So if you know it, if you recognize it, please let us know. Alrighty. I'm going to share this one with you. This is from Matthew Schweitzer, subscriber to the magazine. And here's what he says. Have something of a photo mystery for you. I came across this half-plate tintype of a Union officer. It is actually a photograph of the photograph. At first, I thought it might have been a modern tintype of an old original, but it came in an old envelope frame with information written on the back. I've never seen one like this and thought I might get your opinion. Well, Matthew, I think that what you have here is a really, really well done copy tintype, or it could have also been an ambrotype that was copied as a tintype. That's a little uncommon. The more common usage is to have an ambrotype or a tintype copied as a carte de visite. And the reason for that is many soldiers, once they had a tintype or an ambrotype made, you would not be able to make another one easily because they were unique, one-of-a-kind artifacts. And in order to make enough to share with your friends, it would be rather expensive. You would pay anywhere from 50 cents maybe to $1.50 for a tintype. A carte de visite, on the other hand, you can get a dozen for $1.50, or maybe even $1 if you're lucky. So the most popular and most cost-effective way to reproduce your photograph if you were a soldier was to take your tintype or your ambrotype to your local carte de visite photographer and have a dozen, 24 images made and share them with your friends. This image is interesting because, as I mentioned, it's a tintype of a hard plate image. The reason for that could have been that although the carte de visite became popular, especially as sort of a social media of the 19th century, the tintypes, the ambrotypes, and the daguerreotypes, although they were fading, the daguerreotypes, they were still popular during the war. And so what you find is the popularity of those tintypes and ambrotypes. You have to ask yourself, why were they so popular? And the reason is that unlike the carte de visites, the one-of-a-kind, the single artistry, the single piece of art of these images made them, I think, even more unique and more special This is the kind of image, because it was only one of a kind, you would give a tintype or an ambrotype to a mother and father, to a wife, to a loved one, to a sister or a brother. So I'm not necessarily surprised that this was made as a tintype, but you don't see them very often. I should also point out that these images were oftentimes copied later on. You see a flurry of activity of images being copied in the 1880s and the 1890s. And if you think about it for a moment, why would it be that time period? Well, the answer is fairly simple. You have the children and the grandchildren of these soldiers who are interested to see what Pop and Grandpop looked like when they were young and in uniform. So you see copies being made around that time. And then you also see copies being made again in the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s, as the great-grandchildren are coming along. So copy photographs have a long history that really begins in the Civil War, when photographers are beginning to make all these copies for soldiers, for sailors, for their loved ones. This image, I think, probably dates from somewhere between the end of the Civil War, maybe the 1870s, and on the back of the envelope, which is included here, you see that he's identified Captain Thompson L. Newell. It says New Hampshire Regiment, and then below that it says 5 sons in the service with him. So I had a heads up from Matthew just a couple of hours ago, so I squeezed in some quick research, and what I found is that he enlisted in 1861 in Manchester, New Hampshire. He gave his age at 45. That appears to be a lie or some sort of fabrication. He was actually closer to 53 years old. He was born in 1808. He enlisted as a private. He gets promoted to captain of Company E in the 4th New Hampshire Infantry. He didn't last very long in the Army. In December of '61, he resigns. He's married. The 5 sons, I was only able to find 4, William, John, Henry, and Augustus. And they're all of Civil War age. William is born in 1842, followed by John in 43, Henry in 44, and Augustus in 46. So very possible that all 4 of those sons served. Perhaps there was a 5th that we don't know about yet. But in the time that I had to research, this is about as far as I got. So we've got some good information to get started on. I would love to prove to see if there actually was a 5th son, and to find out if the 4 that we found here this evening were listed. So I should mention too that Thompson lived until 1893. So he survived the war. All of his sons lived into the anywhere from 1880 to 1922. So if those 4 served, they all survived as well. Got one more image to show. I think this is one that all of you know. This is part of the Lillenquist family collection at the Library of Congress. It is ubiquitous. It's been used in numerous magazines, news organizations, websites, books, all over the place. You've seen this image reproduced. And even the owner of it, Tom Lillenquist, or I should say, the Library of Congress is actually the owner. Tom added it to the collection. He'll tell you that it's one of the most iconic images in his collection. And you can understand why. A solemn-looking young lady who is looking exactly towards us, somewhat symmetric, at least her face, her hands are slightly askew, and she's grasping what appears to be an ambrotype or a tintype of the soldier who we want to think is probably her father or a brother, someone close to her. And there's also a thought that whoever the gentleman, the soldier is in that image, didn't survive the war, and it's assumed that this is a mourning photograph showing her grasping the photo of a loved one that she'll never see again in this life. Alan Griffiths contacted me, and he had an interesting take on this that I hadn't heard before. And so I wanted to share it with you tonight and have you all think about it, and something we can talk about at some later point. Here's what Alan says. When we see a photograph of a woman or child of the American Civil War period holding a photograph of a soldier, it is frequently assumed that the soldier is dead. Is this the case? Do you know of an example where the sitters in the portrait and the held photograph are identified, and the date when the soldier died and the date when the photograph was taken or known? To prove it, we need all three parts to the puzzle. It's an intriguing problem, and I think provable examples that they are holding a post-mortem are going to be rare. So Alan has a unique theory that holds that this young lady or other images may not be holding someone who has passed. It may be an image of a soldier who's very much alive. And this is an image that commemorates the soldier service and the family thinking of that soldier. It's easy to see that she might have shared this image with her husband, or pardon me, with her father or her brother or whoever is pictured in the image. So, Alan, I think you ask a really intriguing question. I think it's important that we try to find examples of this. So I'm asking all of you tonight, if you know of such examples, would love to hear about it and to be able to feature them in the magazine. So before we end tonight, I do want to mention a big happening that's going to be taking place on Wednesday, 2 days away, on August 1st, at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The Civil War Photo Sleuth software, which, as many of you may be aware, incorporates face recognition technology, databasing, and community to be able to identify soldiers and sailors. As you know, so many of these soldiers and sailors became separated from their identities. Tintypes, ambrotypes, cartes de visite that were not signed. Images that are wonderful, aesthetically pleasing, tell us a story of the Civil War, could be enriched if we knew more about the soldier who was pictured in it. So Civil War Photo Sleuth is dedicated to the idea. Kurt Luther is the head of Civil War Photo Sleuth, and he'll be at the archives on Wednesday to introduce the application. And this very public launch will be in one of the main rooms on the first floor. Kurt has a sign-up form because the archives would like to know that you're coming. So I would urge you to visit our Facebook page. You can find that information. I'll also post it here for you. If you live in the DC area and if you want to play hooky from work on Wednesday for a little while, maybe have a long lunch, come by to the National Archives and meet Kurt. I'll be there. We'll be talking about photos. We'll be looking at the software and getting your impressions. I want to point out, and Kurt would, I think, agree with me 100%, this is really about community, coming together around technology and letting technology help us to do even more, build on what we've all done for years and years and years. So I hope you'll be there. If you can't be there, we're going to try to have a special Military Images Live broadcast. I'm not sure when we're going to be doing it. I also am concerned because the National Archives is a metal building that was created to withstand fire. And so I don't know if we're going to get reception, but we'll give it a go. If we can broadcast from there, we will do so. So if you can't make it, tune in on Facebook, or maybe better yet, go visit civilwarphotosleuth.com, sign up for a password, and start using the software. Give us your feedback and help us make the next generation of soldier identification. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Have a great night. I've been thinking that Military Images Live should probably have a sign-off. And what I'm going to start using is the motto of our magazine, which is showcase, interpret, and preserve. Keep doing that. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.